bounces away. He floats one wide open, and there he goes. Touchdown! For a Texan touchdown.
The Texans beat the Jaguars in NRG, but it doesn't really feel like it. We're going to talk about all that and more on this edition of The Bullpen. Hello and welcome to The Bullpen. As always, I am James Roy, and with me is Tom Chavarria. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm good. A win is a win, baby. I know based on your tweet, you absolutely love to hear it. So while some people are down in the dumps about this Texan win, I am going to take it and run because as a player on the Houston Texans said, and I'm struggling with names at the moment, I take it back. Aziz Al-Shaair said, I'd rather win and be 3-1 ugly than play phenomenal and be 1-3.
I agree with that sentiment. And I said as much, like I'm grateful for the dub, but it definitely is one of those games that felt, it almost felt a lot like the Vikings game. It didn't feel like the Vikings game because that was miserable to watch to another degree, but there was a lot of things that carried over from the Vikings game and that have shown consistently throughout the season so far that made the game really frustrating. I think Houston Stressens put it best on Twitter. He said, is it bad that at this point when the Texans get a first down, I'm looking for a yellow flag on the field? Like that's like pretty much where I was at. Every time something good happened, I was waiting for it to not have happened. And that to me is the biggest issue, but we'll dive into that in a minute. The Astros are in the playoffs. They did it. They're going to play on Wednesday. We got a
Tuesday.
certain or Tuesday.
Tuesday's game one.
I thought Wednesday was game one. Okay. All right. Well, we got a representative at the Wednesday game from the bullpen. So wish Tom luck as he shows up to support the hometown team in baseball. And we're hoping to see the Texans do what the Astros are doing, right? That's like, I would say the local mold in terms of like sports in general, right? We're both in agreement that we want to see the Texans be a dynasty, a team that obviously has shown they have enough talent. They made a lot of moves to improve on a team that was already good. And we come into the season and they're sitting at 3-1, but this is a team that it almost feels like is not meeting their potential. So it is nice to be at 3-1, right? I want to clarify that. And I want to say, as much as I obviously I tweeted about it in that moment, I was feeling really frustrated. I did not want to hear a single person say a win is a win. Like, I don't want to hear that crowd, that part of the fan base speak. I am happy with this win because it is a win and the Texans need those. It is nice to be 3-1, but something's missing. Something is wrong. And so that's what I want to start with. We normally go offense, defense, but I just want to get your take. What is it to you? One to three things, I don't know, whatever you have on your mind, that is holding this Texans team back from reaching the potential that we talked them up to have this entire offseason.
The offensive line. And the safeties. I won't 100% offensive line. I'll give the safeties a little, but I could say the offensive line 3 times, and I would be totally okay with that. This was perceived strength going into the season. Health was good. You brought back guys that you had faith in, and so far all they have done is proved that A, they're struggling to block people, and B, they absolutely cannot get in line. And between those two things, you're getting holds and illegal formations and false starts, et cetera, et cetera. And as a team, for the group that wants to fire Bobby Slowick, I don't understand how you expect him to have a large playbook that he can draw from when it's second and long, third and long, over and over and over again. I mean, they're off schedule entirely throughout halves of these games, and they're able to somehow overcome poor field position constantly. So with me, the offensive line getting their groove, whatever that is, however that is probably the one thing that I would think would change the way these scores are, would change perception of the team. You know, the offense just feels so disjointed because they're not scoring enough points for people. And I understand it. But at the same time, you know, And you compared the Texans to the Astros, and I thought that was a great comparison. If you know your Astros history from this year, they started off horribly, lost tons of baseball games early on in the season. And now, if you watch baseball tonight, this evening, when they talked about what they thought the playoffs could look like, a lot of people had the Astros in the ALCS. A lot of people had the Astros representing the AL in the World Series, the most complete baseball team. And you would have never said that when they were 12-24, when they were 7-19, and people, national media, local media, were basically off the bandwagon going, they had a good run, but they're done. And now all of those same people are going, the Astros could win it all. And you wouldn't have thought that in the beginning.
You wouldn't have. And to speak to that Astros comparison, that reminds me of a comparison I'd like to make within the NFL, which is the Chiefs. And so I feel like the late stage Chiefs dynasty that we're in is at that point where they can just put the worst product on the field and still be 4-0. Like because Pat Mahomes is that guy, because they've just played to that point where like it can look ugly and it doesn't matter. They've already won a bunch of championships and they still are a really good team, but no one is like, oh, Pat Mahomes literally took out his best wide receiver. And no one's panicking because it's the Chiefs. It's just, that's what it is. And the Astros, like as bad as it got early in the season, there were some people that really panicked. Like, I'm not going to lie to you and say that there was never a thought in my mind that it could be the end. But like, I mean, it's the Astros. They've historically played really bad baseball early in the season. But like in this dynasty that they are currently in, I would equate them to like the stage that they're at is like more like the Chiefs. It's a really good baseball team that, is expected to do well. The talent's there. If they don't put it together, they'll put it together eventually. And that kind of feels like what the Texans have been doing, but it's too early to me in this dynasty for that to be the way they're getting wins. That's what's the most frustrating is that like if the Texans had come off of 2 back-to-back Super Bowls and started the season like this, I'd be like, maybe there's a little bit of, chemistry issues. We'd probably have the same discussions, but I'd be like, this is a team that's going to get it. And we're in a fragile stage of the Texans' development, right? This is this transition from rebuild to being in your Super Bowl window. And a lot of people this offseason put the Texans in their Super Bowl window, right? So with that, when you're in your Super Bowl window, you don't make the same mistakes. Like this game for like in 2022, I would have been ecstatic to see the Texans come away with a win in this game. This would have been the highlight of my week because the expectations were low. This is a Texans team where we've set the expectations past rebuild mode. A win is just not like a nice, I don't know, like a luxury. It's a requirement for this group. This group is required to be great. Greatness is expected of them. And so, like, I think I had this discussion with you last season, and you, rightfully so, because it was earlier in the rebuild, probably tried to tone me down a little bit. But I feel like more justified in this train of thought, right? The reason this win is frustrating is because this doesn't fly against good teams. In the playoffs, this is you go home. You don't win that game. The Jaguars are, as much as I talked up the divisional aspect of this, the Jaguars are still not a good team, and they are not the reason that this game was close. Like the Texans are the reason this game was close. It should have been a lot worse. But to speak to the original question, the 3 issues I see, and it's funny that you brought up the secondary in your answer, because honestly, the 3 issues I have were so bad, at least 2 of them were, that I honestly forgot that the defense had issues. Like that's where I was at. Like I can attribute the defense's issues so far this season to the typical effect, right? I think I've spoken to this before, but a defense can only be so good when the offense doesn't produce. And so at some point when the offense just goes quiet, which the offense had a really good first half, right, in terms of production, but to start the second half, the offense kind of went dead, and then the defense was constantly on the field, and there's only so long they can do that before they fall apart. So there was some minor issues early on, and the defense wasn't flawless, but it was never something that was at the forefront of my mind when thinking about what was wrong with this Texans team in this game. What was at the forefront of my mind? I agree with you on the offensive line. I think you can break that down into 2 issues: penalties, and I'll say, first and foremost, if the penalty issue goes away, the other issues are so much smaller than the penalty issue. I think this team improves so drastically from not constantly having to play from behind the sticks because of penalties that these other issues are, I don't want to say minor, but they are significantly less impactful I think, than the penalty issue. That's what I'll say. And then the skill issue for the offensive line, the effort issue, whatever you want to call it, just the offensive line in general is a whole nother thing for me. It's always been one of the weaker groups, one of the bigger question marks. We talked to how much of a question mark the offensive line was going into the season. Them performing at a serviceable level is acceptable in my eyes. If they eliminate the penalties, I think what they've been doing for the most part is at that acceptable minimum level, like the absolute bare minimum. Like occasionally there's just a boneheaded play. You hate it. It sucks. It's low effort sometimes from Laramie or from other players, but the penalties to me are the deeper issue. And then the third issue, I only bring this one up because it's what's most commonly talked about. I'm not really firmly in this camp, and you spoke to it as well. Bobby Slowick as a play caller to me has not been that impactful. And you also spoke to it in your answer earlier, which is that how many offensive play callers have a play call for 2nd and 25, for 3rd and 26? Like, if you're calling a play for 2nd and 25 and you just call a screen, and your issue is that the offensive play caller called too many screens on 2nd and 25, you have lost the root cause. I don't know how many of you work in your own work environment and have to determine the root cause of issues. That's literally my job. And if you're not finding the root cause, you're not getting down to it. You're not fixing the issue. You're just going to keep seeing that same mistake. And so the root cause is the first two issues that I brought up. Bobby Slowick's play calling, I don't think we have a large enough sample size of that in an environment where there's not been so many other issues that we can make a judgment call. And honestly, it's a miracle that we've won games with the other two issues. So Bobby Slowick's play calling is so low. I'd honestly put your safety, I'd call it secondary, but I'd say the secondary is probably a larger issue in retrospect than Bobby Slowick's play calling. But with that in mind, we both gave pretty long-winded answers there. I feel like I need to take a breath. Tom, do you have anything to say while I catch my breath and breathe?
Well, I didn't attack the secondary as a whole because I feel like generally most people think that the corners are above reproach, even though there's a play that Jalen Petrie makes in this game that if he doesn't make it, Kamari Lassiter has given up a huge first down, a critical first down that extends that drive. And as badly as Jalen Petrie has played in coverage, I think this is a scenario where you have to like kind of weigh what you're getting versus what you're having to give up. Is he the best coverage safety? Absolutely not. I think you hope to buy a couple plays with him being in coverage. You don't necessarily want him guarding or defending some of your premier guys in coverage. He makes his hay and really makes an impact up in the line, making tackles, playing aggressive football. I don't see him as an issue until you really find a coordinator that schemes to get him attacked, which I feel like D'Amico's got to find better ways of managing that, right? You can't constantly have these teams scheming to get, Eric Murray and Jalen Petrie in coverage. That's a problem. I think if you're touting your corners and you have the faith in them that you do, well, then you need to find a way to make sure that that's the matchup and you're not getting beat by a offensive coordinator, in scheme. Now, go ahead.
I mean, I agree. And to say, right, we talk about Bobby Slowick's play calling and scheming of the offense, but I think that if we're really looking at it, the position group that's been most heavily affected by scheme and inability to adapt and change is probably the defense. And I say that because we faced some top-tier wide receivers, and even though it proved effective against the Browns, shadowing Amari Cooper with our best corner, the guy we tout as being undervalued top corner in that class, if we believe that, then why are we not more often than not putting him on the problem? And you could talk to Derek or to Jalen Petrie being in coverage. I think that could be sourced from, like, what does that speak to the fact that through the first 3 weeks, I haven't seen week 4's snap count distribution, but the only two corners that have played football for the Texans this season through 3 weeks is Kamari Lassiter and Derek Stingley Jr. There are other corners on the roster who are designated as nickel corners who have yet to touch the field for a singular snap for this Texans team. Because Jalen Petrie's playing nickel corner. Jalen Petrie's playing linebacker 3. Jalen Petrie's playing star safety, right? If Jalen Petrie is filling all those roles, either the Texans believe he's doing it adequately all around and they don't see the need, or they don't have a lot of faith in their depth at those positions, or like in particular with the nickel, since nickel is technically a starting position in this base defense, you believe that Jalen Petrie is your starting nickel and you don't think that you need a coverage nickel, a cornerback that could better fill that role. So like I said at the top, I mean, D'Amico's scheming of the defense, I think, is a larger issue than Bobby Slowick's. And that's to say, I didn't name it on those top three because I don't think it's what's holding this team back. I think it only gets, highlighted. It really gets called out when the offense can't produce because they're constantly 25 yards behind the chains on second down. That is the issue. That is the root cause, and that is what needs to be fixed. We can talk about D'Amico's defensive scheming, how Bobby Slowick calls plays, and the coaching. Like you said, after we figure out the players. And to that, I mean, both of us have served in environments where it's like the top takes the blame. In particular for me, if a submarine does something wrong, they don't fire the lowly petty officer that screwed up and, jammed the rudder down and took us down below our depths that we're supposed to go. They fire the captain because the captain is in charge of that ship. So D'Amico literally is nicknamed Cap. And in that applies outside of the military. That's just like in general. And I think that brings up an interesting point, which is that Doug Peterson in his post-game comments said what we're saying. Like, as fans, you can say that, right? The players, at some point, you have to ask them to perform. But Doug Peterson said that his offensive coordinator called a good game and said, it's a two-way street and we need our players to perform. How do you feel about that coming from the coach, right? Because that's at the end of the day, the coach should just be like, oh, it's on me, in my opinion. I don't think it should ever be a thing of pointing to the player in front of the press. That's not the place to do it.
I am so torn on this because I agree with you that that's a behind closed doors thing. However, at what point do you go, what do I call? What do I do? There were some throws that Trevor Lawrence missed. I think he missed Christian Kirk on what would have been a touchdown. And if he makes that play, this game's totally different. I mean, how can you argue with them putting up, the points that they put up and just not getting a dub on the road? Like, I understand his frustration. I agree with him. I understand your comment where, okay, maybe I wear it for my players, but like you said, to go back to what you said, they don't fire the players; they fire the captain. So if I'm going down with the ship, I might as well at least say, look, I think we did what we were supposed to do here. Those guys got to execute. Maybe he could have played the whole, we got to help them execute better and, smooth the blame out evenly amongst. But
well, the problem is that he basically says like about how the players have to perform and then ends the comment with, but I'm the coach, so I guess it's my fault. And I'm like, that's not how, if you're going to take the blame, just take it. Like, what's the point in saying all that if you're just going to say at the end, but I guess it's my fault? Like, if you guess it's your fault, then just take the blame. Like,
well, he expanded on that though and was like, I can take it. You can blame me.
Yeah, that's what he said. I can take it. If you could take it, then just take it. Just don't say you can take it and then don't throw the players in front of the bus, run them over, back up and say, but I can take it, and then get out of the bus and act like you didn't just run them over and back over them and then go, well, but it's my fault. It is your fault. And now the players have video evidence that you believe it's their fault too. I mean, obviously, like I said, that's in front of the media. The players probably already know how he feels about it. Like, judging by the way he spoke to the media, it's probably gotten to a point in that locker room where he felt the need to say that in front of the media because it's just not hitting home in the locker room behind closed doors. That's my guess. That's like all I can look to. The fact that he was asked about his job status after going 0-4 and being 1-9 in his last 10 games and was like acted shocked by it. Man, I think there's something else going on in Jacksonville. The only team in history to make the playoffs after going 0-4 is the 1992 San Diego Chargers. And I call them that because they were in San Diego when that happened. But I don't know, man. It's a rough scene in Jacksonville. I don't want to talk about the Jaguars, though. You know what I want to talk about?
Well, real
here
quick,
you
real
go,
quick.
you got to say what you got to say. Here you go.
I think it's interesting because we've said this on this podcast that we don't think Trevor Lawrence is a good quarterback. And what if he feels that way? And this is his way to say that. Like, I understand where he's coming from. Like, look, I shouldn't be tied to this guy because you tied me to him. Now, I'm going to do my job, but if he doesn't perform, what am I supposed to do? Like, they paid him a ton of money, and I don't know that they put the coach. I mean, the way they're playing right now makes me wonder, and those comments makes me wonder if they felt differently about the situation. And now it's kind of boiling over. Like, we never thought that was a good quarterback. And if he's out there, I thought it was interesting too. They asked him if he was going to play call, and he's like, I'll take it under consideration. But it was like begrudgingly, right? Because he's trying to protect his job. And I understand that.
Well, as much as I said I didn't want to talk about the Jaguars, I'll continue to talk about the Jaguars. Yeah, I mean, I feel like they cast just cement boots around Doug Peterson's feet and pushed him off the plank. And now they're like, hey, why are you not doing well with those cement boots around your feet? And then what they're going to do is they're going to fire Doug Peterson, and they're going to rip those cement boots from his skeleton at the bottom, 10,000 leagues below the ocean, bring those boots back up and fit them for the next coach, and then push him off the edge. And that's the thing, is that it was Urban Meyer, and then you step through and it's this guy, and now it's Doug Peterson. And how many times is it that coach until it's not? Until it's always been the fact that Trevor Lawrence is not as good as his number one overall pick status has made him out to be. And that's what makes it so hard to make it, is that like a guy like Brock Purdy, the fact that he has made it as a starting quarterback in the NFL for as long as he has is impressive, because he's a 7th round pick. You move on from a 7th round pick the very second anything goes wrong, because you have no financial obligation to see it through. Whereas with a 1st round pick, you've spent the draft capital. Now they've invested the quarterback contract in him. They have to see it through. But I mean, I don't know. I appreciated what, which one was it? There was another team that kind of it was the Broncos. Them moving on from Russell Wilson after all the money they gave him. I respected that, because you shouldn't just stick in a crap situation just because it's a crap situation and you feel like you're stuck there. But I mean, granted, Walmart owns the Broncos, so they've got enough money to eat that $40 million APY. So anyway, now I really don't want to talk Jaguars. I want to talk Texans. We went backwards. We usually start with the offense, but we got sidetracked with what's wrong with the Texans. So, and speaking of what's wrong with the Texans, I want to talk about the offensive performance from the perspectives of what went right, since things did go right. And here's what I'll start with. I feel like a lot of people maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm off base, but I watched the game and CJ put together a beautiful 2-minute drill. One of the better comeback drives ever. Not ever, but it was textbook. It was a very good comeback drive. You leave 20 seconds on the clock, you set it up, you assure victory with the way CJ Stroud went about quarterbacking that drive. And after that was done, all I could think about was how frustrated I was with how the rest of the game went. But man, that drive was really give me your thoughts on the final drive from the Texans offense.
Well, for all the people that have issues with Bobby Slowick, they're really going to have a hard time trying to find fault with him on this drive, because not only did they manage to march down the field and score what proved to be the game-winning touchdown, they did it and didn't leave anything for Jacksonville to do anything with. I think the play call to Schultz to the sticks on the 2, I thought that was such a brilliant play call from the aspect of like, I want to get the first down and I want to milk this clock just a little bit further. And when you think of like how they were able to A, ensure they got in the end zone, and B, literally made it impossible for Jacksonville to do anything with the kickoff and just completely handcuffed them. I thought it was a masterful performance by CJ, Nico, Bobby Slowick, the whole gang. And I get your frustration. It makes sense to go, why can't they do that every time? But to that, I say that the league is a tough place to play. You just can't guarantee that you put all the pieces on the board and, okay, that's a touchdown. That's a touchdown. Some of the best teams struggle mightily We talked about Kansas City. Kansas City scored 17 points today, won a football game. And nobody's talking. Patrick
Justin
Mahomes
Herbert was pissed. He was pressed.
Yeah. Patrick Mahomes threw the interception that got Rashid Rice's knee just absolutely blown out.
Not only threw it, he also is the one who took Rashid Rice out for the season.
Exactly. But again, we're not talking about it because they got the dub. Now, in Kansas City, they might be. In Kansas City, they might be a tad bit frustrated with Patrick Mahomes. Are they going to let that come into the fact that they're undefeated? Absolutely not.
There's some James, Roy, and Tom sitting there tonight in front of their computers, really frustrated with that whole situation. But I feel like as a whole, yeah, I agree with you.
I think they're going to be like, man, Xavier Worthy, next guy up, he's going to be great. Did you see him?
I need him to be great. I have him in a few fantasy leagues.
He's going to be everything that Rashid Rice was and more. And they're like, speedy recovery. We should get back, but Super Bowl's still on. Xavier Worthy's the next big great thing, and that's how they're gonna do it. Now in Houston, a lot of people have scar tissue and they're hurt and damaged, and they don't have the success to lean on. We made the comparison to the Astros. I feel like the comparison there is that they have that success to lean on too. They'll figure it out. They'll be fine. It's the Astros. It takes a lot. Well, this season it didn't take that much, but it took a lot for some people to get off the reservation. I think with the Texans, what a lot of people have to do is go, look, this is year 2 of this thing. I know everybody wants Super Bowl, but I think we've built them up as high as you can possibly build them, and that is the ceiling, no question. But to assume that they're just going to show up and be flawless out the gate and nothing be wrong, and they're going to win all the games, and the story's going to go happily ever after, and CJ's going to throw for 350, and the offense is going to rush for 100 yards every game, it's just a little silly.
It is. Yeah. I think that this desire for excellence, I'm guilty of it. Like I told you at the beginning of the show, like the standard is so much incredibly higher than it's ever been in the history of the Houston Texans organization. That's not an exaggeration. It's just simply what it is. The amount of times that the Texans have had a young second-year quarterback who had one of the greatest rookie seasons in the history of the league, and then immediately thereafter had high hopes for not only the playoffs, but breaking past the divisional round is one. Like I can't say that Deshaun Watson, as great as he was for the first 8 or 9 weeks of his rookie season, generated that same belief just based off the team that was around him entering his sophomore season. The Texans truly masterfully at the front office level built a roster that's meant to contend, and that's why that standard is so much higher. To speak to the drive, I mean, I feel like someone captured it really well. I think it was Brett Coleman, some major Twitter influencer that's a Texans fan, said he cannot convey to you the feeling, how weird it is, the feeling of having a quarterback that leads you to believe and as bad as the game was going, when CJ Stroud got the ball on that 2-minute drill, I was like, yeah, we got a chance. There's always a chance. When CJ Stroud has the ball, 2-minute drill, the Texans will always have a chance to win a game if they're within a score. So to that, obviously that was nice. And that, I think, is one of the bigger parts of being an elite team is no matter how bad the game goes, when the moment comes, and that's what the Chiefs are at this point. It's I don't think the Chiefs are a great football team in a lot of ways right now, but man, I do not want to give Patrick Mahomes the ball down 4 with 2 minutes left. That's not ideal at all, because I know what he's capable of. I know that when the moment comes, he can step up and do it. And I feel the same way about CJ Stroud. And that's why, I guess I'll look at that one Denzel Washington video meme where it's I'm leaving here with something. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead. I'll ask you to do the same, but I'm going to give you a couple of things that I'm leaving this game with that are positive notes. So one, the final drive, and just what I described there, CJ being that guy, having a quarterback that can step up and do that, right? The other one is CJ Stroud in general, 345 yards, 2 touchdowns, just, a really dominant performance, an accurate performance. He stepped up. The receiver room in general did really well. But the other takeaway I have that's kind of my, I'm leaving here with something, is Nico Collins is still that guy. Nico Collins barring some miracle on Monday Night Football, that's the doubleheader that no one asked for and no one likes. I hate doubleheaders on Monday Night Football. It's the worst, but I don't know if you agree with me on that. I'm judging by your reaction. I don't know if you agree with me, but we can talk about that in a minute. But Nico Collins being the wide receiver one, after people doubted me immediately after we traded for Stephon Diggs, I took a very firm stance that Nico Collins is still wide receiver one, and Stephon Diggs' presence on this roster doesn't change that. Met with a lot of backlash from people that thought Diggs would be the wide receiver one, people that thought Tank Dell was a better wide receiver, and lo and behold, and we've spoken to it, right? Nico Collins is the largest beneficiary from the Tank Dell injury last year, and he's the largest beneficiary from any Tank Dell injury in general. That's not, I don't know, it's not gloating, it's not to say, but when there's less talent on the field, Nico Collins is shown to be able to take up that target share and do something with it. So, and shout out to Mr. October, I don't know how you spell it, but this dude on Instagram said it's a shame that, Nico Collins is not the wide receiver one, and he's literally the reason this team sucks. And I think I said it earlier on one of the previous episodes. I was like, wow, what a way to just very publicly proclaim, I do not know ball. I'm like, man, you've seen it too. That's like people that met Jesus, that lived with Jesus and just don't believe it. I'm like, okay, dude, whatever. You were there, you saw it. You literally watched him walk out of the tomb after you watched him get crucified. And anyway, I'm delving down a path here. I'm on a bender here. I'm going to turn it over to you before I get too deep.
Look, I will be the first to commend you, because I was right there with everybody else going, I'm not ready to say Nico Collins is wide receiver one. There's so much talent. I thought Tank Dell coming back was going to really matter. I thought Stephon Diggs was going to really matter. I thought the ball was going to get spread out evenly so that we were literally talking about a different wide receiver one every week. And so far, all Nico Collins has done since then is said, shut the F up, Tom, because every week he goes out there and he balls. The dude is and some of it, I believe, is scheme. I think they broke it down on tape. I know Houston Stressens had it at one point where they believe that there is very few DBs that can guard Nico Collins one-on-one. He's 6'4", he's 220, huge vertical, big frame, and they just don't feel corners can do that. So what they've done so far throughout the season is singled him on one side, three guys on the other, and really just forced you to try to guard him. If you were gonna play some kind of zone coverage, they were going to find a hole in it and then hit him. Or if you were going to play a man-to-man on that one side, they were going to beat you. And so far, they've been able to do that repeatedly. Nico Collins, I said it on the post game that I did earlier, is making that contract look ridiculous right now that Nick Caserio just signed him to, because there are guys that are getting paid way more money than this man to do way less. So when you look at the production per the dollar, he is 100% outplaying his contract right now. And teams are having to literally figure out a way to stop him before anything else.
100%. So did you have your what are you leaving this game with? What are your positives that you saw that you're like, that's it? That the game wasn't great, but I'm leaving here with something.
So my positives, the Texans are 3-1, and I know I've said that already.
A win is a win. As
it stands, they are the number 2 seed in the AFC. And when we talk about where we want the Texans to be and what we think they need and how that works out, that's where they need to be. So there's one undefeated team in the entire AFC, and that's the Kansas City Chiefs.
And they've looked very beatable.
Very beatable. I mean, the loss the Texans sustained, which I think this is another thing that I'm taking away from this, Minnesota looks absolutely 100% the real deal. That was not a fluke. And their building is an entirely tough place to play. They went into Green Bay and ran out to a 28-0 lead before Green Bay decided, hey, we're going to make this look respectable. But I don't know that it was ever really in doubt. And the score is very misleading. It was 31-29, but that was in Lambeau, which is an impossible place to play in for a lot of teams, especially in the division. And Minnesota's the truth. So for the Texans to really only look bad against probably the best team in the NFC, I feel like that's a good thing. The other thing that I look at is that this is probably as bad as they can be, and they're 3-1. Like when you step back and go, okay, I'm going to tell you they're going to be penalized for 1 billion yards. I'm going to tell you that Tank Dell's hurt. I'm going to tell you that Christian Harris is hurt. I'm going to tell you that Jimmy Ward, however you feel about him, was hurt, and Danico Autry's out with suspension, and they're still 3-1. They've played absolutely awful. The offensive line is blocking for no one. No one can run the football. Joe Mixon's been out for 2 weeks. They're 3-1 with all of that. Only way to go is up.
A win is a win.
A win is a win.
That's what I got. And that emphasizes another point, which is help is on the way. There is people injured on this roster right now that are coming back that have shown this season or the previous season that they are pretty important pieces to this Texans team. So I'll leave it at that. I mean, final thoughts on this. I mean, I think we pretty much captured that. It's just, not the most beautiful win, but it's whatever. I will say to your Vikings point, I think that it'd be so like the Vikings to just crush the Texans in the regular season and then come to New Orleans and play the Texans in the Super Bowl and just do what the Vikings do in the Super Bowl historically. Like, as much as like the Texans don't have any ground to stand on, that would be their first Super Bowl they've ever been to. But man, that was a thought that came into my head, was maybe them, because my Super Bowl prediction preseason was Texans Lions, and if the Lions have to go through the Vikings, I'm not sure they make it out. Like at this point, I'm not gonna judge the Vikings so quickly based off such a short stretch. I mean, the Saints had theirs already kind of fall off, and I'm kind of waiting to see with the Vikings. But man, right now they are just playing really good football. Tom and I do the bullpen. This is the bullpen. You've been listening, so you know what it is. You can find it wherever you get podcasts. If you're listening and you'd like to watch, I did put a lot of effort into this graphic stuff. I basically minored in graphic design based off how much graphic designing I've been doing for this show. But if you'd like to watch us, you can look up at the Bullpen Cast, or you can look up the Bullpen, a Houston Texans podcast, and we'll pop up on YouTube and you can watch us. And if you do that same search, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. So thanks for tuning in. I am at James Roy NFL on Twitter and at N1 Texans fan on Instagram. Tom is at Third Coast Tom on Twitter and at TC Tom1 on Instagram. And we've once again been the Bullpen. Thanks for tuning in. As always, stay classy, Houston, and vamos Texans. Thanks for tuning into The Bullpen, a Texans podcast. Please like, comment, subscribe, and follow along for more Texans talk from The Bullpen.